أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. This was the dua of Yunus alayhi salam when he was inside the belly of the whale. In three darknesses he called to Allah, and Allah Ta'ala heard his prayer. So this is a very powerful prayer for when you are in difficulty. So today we will continue our study of the Great Transformation by Polanyi. Basically, Polanyi is writing from the point of view that the market society emerged as a mutation on natural human society, and that in the World War II it is now finished. And and now the question that is facing the world today after the World War II is how to construct a new type of economy which will not be a market economy, because market economy is very harmful, and we have seen the harm by this catastrophe which World War II was. In about 50 million people or so died, or lives were destroyed. And it was the biggest catastrophe the world has seen. So he said that now we should go back to pre-market models and find a good one, and he has some suggestions for. But actually what he foresaw was not what happened, although we will discuss that part too later, what happened after World War II. So basically the Great Transformation is about the rise and the fall of the market economy. This is what the main theme of the book is. So first he says that if you look at economic progress, it's not continuous and smooth and everybody benefits. Actually, if you look at the transition from the hunter-gatherer to agriculture, you find that there's a reduction in nutrition, because first of all you had lots of exercise, and then you had a wide variety of food in the hunter-gatherer economy. In agriculture economy you have a limited number of staples, and life is also sedentary. So there was actually a greater security, less adventure, and at the same time a reduction in the living standards, which you can see by measuring the skulls of people and so on. Similarly, he says that your industrialization took place, and this was overall a wealth producing process, but it involved misery for the masses. And basically any type of social change, he says, requires time for people to adjust, especially when you big change. So see, from the start we are going to be studying process of change and disequilibrium, and this is the whole goal of this. So the goal of our study here is to understand the process of social change. How do societies change? This is the main goal of Polanyi. So now we are not studying sequence of history as a sequence of events, that X happened and Y happened and then Z happened. We are studying the process of how societies evolve and change, and Polanyi has a rather deep and complex theory of long-term social change, which is more advanced than Marx, who had a similar theory, but it was primitive. The first person to study the long-term process of historical change is Ibn Khaldun, and he identified, basically this was the crucial element, and actually the Muqaddamah is a book which is contemporary in the sense that many people today read it and get insights from it, because it's the first book which goes beyond a recording of events that X happened and Y happened, but he thinks about what are the drivers of historical change, what causes societies to grow and prosper, and what causes the decline and fall of societies. So it was this idea that was later picked up by famous historian Gibbon, who wrote The Rise and Fall of Roman Empire, and he studied, and after that basically this idea, but this idea goes back to Ibn Khaldun, and he is the father of this subject, studying the drivers of historical change. And basically Polanyi is following in the tradition that was created by Ibn Khaldun. So now we come to very specific details about how Polanyi views the process of social change, and these are all very natural things. He says, first of all, you think about a society which is in some sort of equilibrium, like hunter-gatherer. Now something changes. What can that be? This is some external factor. It can be a change in climate, it can be change in the productivity of your crops, you start to get surplus. There is a new enemy that appears on the horizon, or enemy learns to use a new weapon, or new communal goals. As a society together, we should work for something like this is what happened at the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The same society, no external changes, no material changes, but they decided that our goal is to live Islam and to spread Islam, and that changed history. So, discovery of new methods of achieving traditional goals. So if you know how to grow crops, but you learn harvesting and fertilizers and other things which help, that can also. So something changes. When the change occurs, then this change affects different groups in the society differently. Some benefit, some are harmed. And basically Marxist theory says that history is a class struggle. The laborers have interests which are adverse to the capitalist interests, and they are fighting each other, and this is the process which describes history. Now what Polanyi says is this is not correct. That he says that in the short run, when the overall social structure is fixed, this is fine, this is correct theory. But in the long run, when you have long run social change, then some classes are destroyed in the process, some new classes emerge, so it can't be all about class struggle. So for example, if you think about, there's a technique that I would like to teach you that whenever you have an abstract concept, to understand it you have to translate it into concrete terms. So if you look at hunter-gatherer society, that is, and think about how it might have become agricultural society. Now the hunter-gatherer societies are nomadic societies, so it's a big change to settle down in one place. It won't happen very easily. I mean, even if people learn how to plant things, it's very difficult to say, okay, let's plant and wait for the harvest and give up your traditional. So basically in a hunter-gatherer there were two types of people. There were people who are good hunters, and then there are people who are good at recognizing plants, and so two classes. Obviously the gatherers are going to become the people who grow crops, and the hunters are going to become the warriors. So new classes will be created, old classes will be destroyed, and the process must occur over time, and it will transition, and there will be social adjustments. The social norms will change. I mean, in hunter, things which are considered virtuous are defined by your great hunting ability, but in the agricultural economy, different things will become virtues. The production of surplus is what leads to art and philosophy, and because you have time, because you can produce excess food. So that was just to illustrate the idea. Now we come to the real history of, basically what we're trying to do is trace the history of how the market economy came into existence, and also how it was destroyed by the World War II. But now we are coming back to the beginning. We have actually looked at the end first, and now we are trying to trace the origins of the market. So we have talked about enclosures. Enclosures, there is a class struggle. There is the rich people who want to enclose land, and that's called improvement. They want to use the land more productively. And on the other hand, there are the poor people, and for them it's a matter of life and death. It's their home, habitation. So there is economic progress that takes place. The productive capacity definitely increases when you enclose land and use mass productive techniques. But at the same time, there is mass misery. People lose access to their ability to live and they are dependent on the mercy of somebody else. So this has been called the revolution of the rich against the poor. Now he says that when you look at historians writing about this, he says that they are writing in an incorrect way, because basically they are looking at the outcome, and basically what happens is that the history is written by the victors of the revolution. So the point of view of the other side is not represented. So he says that a lot of historians write that this was inevitable and it had to be that way, and they describe all of the virtues and advantages in terms of the increasing productivity, but they neglect the underside. So there was, starting from very early period, there was the effort by the rich people to enclose land, to appropriate it for private use and to take it away from the common use. And there was a resistance by the poor people, and there was the Peasants' Revolt, Kett's Rebellion in 1500s. And in 1607 there were two different revolutions against enclosures. So in this period of time, there were a large number of, basically this was a relentless process. The rich were more powerful and the poor were weak, so they kept enclosing, and there were strikes and revolts and court cases and everything, but basically the process kept on going on. So it was just a historical there was a lot of change, and that is what a conservative society doesn't like. In traditional society, change is resisted. So basically what Polanyi talks about is the double movement. He says that if you want to understand history, you have to understand that it is a battle between two forces. On the one hand, there is the force of the progress, and then there is the resistance to this force of progress, and both of these play an equal role in shaping the history. So in the early period, in 16th century, what was happening was that people would enclose large periods of land, but labor wasn't very plentiful at that time. People were able to live off their own land. So as a result, sheep farming was the thing. They were converted land into pastures rather than crop. Even that was profitable in terms of economic productivity, but it also had a huge number of bad effects, and some of the authors said that in England the sheep are eating the people. So there was a delicate balance of power, because what happened is that the king, it was a monarchy, the king is always under threat from the aristocracy of rebellions. So basically the king is allied with the poor people against the aristocracy. So there were laws like the king, there was no standing armies at that time, so the king would ask the aristocrats to provide soldiers. At the same time, there was a law that the aristocrats cannot keep their own armies, because there is always a threat of revolution, so people can be executed for raising their own armies. There is a law about that. So there is a delicate balance of power. On the one hand, the king needs the aristocrats to govern the land. On the other hand, he doesn't want to give them too much power, because they can revolt against him. So the king is naturally allied with the poor people, and so the poor people would often take their cases to the king, and the king would often rule against their lords. So for this reason, the enclosures process went slowly, because it was not all one-sided. There was power on the other side, and there were courts, and there was what Polanyi says is that the people think that the battle against the enclosures was a fruitless battle against progress. This is what the historians say. He says this is a wrong view. Actually, what the battle did was to slow down the rate of change enough so that the people could adjust to this change. So, in the end, the underlying economic trends dominated. There was, and in fact, Polanyi quotes somebody that in the end, the poor, the gentleman will be satisfied in their want for improvement, and the poor man will have his hut. I mean, because there is enough production to provide food to all, but at loss of dignity, at loss of lifestyle change, social change was occurring, and that's so. The peasants, so the class of peasants, which transited to the labor force when the sheep became plentiful and the wool was available, so there were spinning industry was created, and the industrial revolution took place because of the cotton textile, which was basically a follow-up on wool. So the ground is being prepared for the industrial revolution. Now something very interesting happened in 1640, which was the English Civil War. Cromwell, basically this is the result of the part which is not mentioned by Polanyi, but actually is equally important, the changes in religion and religious thinking that are going on. So basically Cromwell led the Protestant revolution against the king, and there was a period of about 20 years where England had no king, the king was executed and the parliament was in power. So Cromwell was very efficient administrator and very brilliant military strategist, but when he died, his son could not handle the situation, and so in 1660 King Stuart was placed back on the throne and monarchy was restored. So this was called the Restoration. But there was the aristocrats restored Stuart to power, but they extracted a lot of promises and concessions. So at this point, they became the powerful party. The king was no longer, because he had been placed in power by the aristocrats. They acquired and they used this massively to convert. And so after 1660s, the process of privatization and closures became very strong, and this is what led to the creation of poverty and the labor class. Now, poverty in modern terms is different from poverty in ancient terms. Bible says the poor you will always have with you, and poverty was not a social problem, because there were two big supports of poverty in traditional society. One is that, of course, land is free, there is no enclosure, so they can earn their living by hunting, by gathering, by many methods, by cutting wood and selling or providing service. But with enclosures, a lot of these possibilities go away. And basically, the problem arises that the poor are no longer able to survive on their own. This is the issue. In ancient societies, everybody is poor, but there is enough food for all. And so it's not a social problem. Poverty as a social problem arises when the poor cannot survive on his own. So basically the poverty is a creation of the Industrial Revolution. So once you have this modern poverty, then you get the labor class, the people who have nothing to sell except their own lives in return for money so that they can eat. And this is the only trade that is available to them in a market economy. So I've already discussed this, that now this transition from the king to parliamentary power did not lead to an increase in efficiency of administration. Actually, the king and the courts and actually the churches also were part of this administration at that time. They had a fairly efficient administrative system, and a shift to parliament led to a lot of anarchy, and Polanyi writes that it took 2 centuries to recover to the same level that the kings had in terms of efficiency in administration. It also brought a lot of changes in the social structure. The idea of aristocracy and in the British thought that there is the common people, the vulgar people, who are actually entirely different class. This became firmly embedded. The aristocrats are entitled to their wealth, and they have blue blood. Normal people have red blood, and so on. So this is a different race. I mean, these ideas were very strongly embedded. Even if you read the novels like Jane Austen, so there is. I mean, they were poor. It means that they were poor in the aristocracy. They had small lands, and the real poor are not even mentioned. They don't come into the picture. They are invisible. They are not real human beings. This is actually what was thought. Like the Dickens novel starts by this aristocrat. He crushes a child playing in the streets by his carriage, and he tosses a few coins to the parents, and he goes on his way. So it was not like killing a real person. So what happened as a result of these enclosures was the agricultural revolution. This was a complex of many things. There was many techniques. You see, once you have large pieces of land which you have private right to, then you can think about improvements and technology, because you can appropriate the rents. So there were lots of things that led to the agricultural revolution leads to a surplus of food. Surplus of food is necessary for your surplus labor army, which is going to work in your cities. So again, this was social change, and it was carried out gradually and in a slow process. See, this is real economics as opposed to this mathematics that you study. So in the mid-18th century, there was the Industrial Revolution. So actually, Polanyi is a very good writer. He writes very eloquently. So I've taken some of his quotes there. Laboring people were crowded together into new places of desolation, the so-called industrial towns. The country folks had been dehumanized into slum dwellers. They were living their lives in dignity and respect while being poor. In fact, this is also a transition in ideological thought. You see, poverty is respectable both in Islam and in Christianity. Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, was poor, and he encouraged poverty, and in the church you take vows of poverty. Poverty is supposed to be the good state of life, and having wealth is a concession to the human weakness. But this changed when poor became non-self-sustaining. So basically, when you talk about industrial revolution, it's an abyss of human degradation. People were converted into machine parts. And the industrial revolution now, this is what he says, was the beginning of a revolution as extreme as those that ever inflate the sectarians, meaning religious sects. The new creed, the new religion that was born, was completely materialistic and believed that all human problems could be solved by unlimited amounts of material commodities. This is very important because we have traced the religious background in some other lecture. So the fact that people are losing faith in God, this is also a reason that they're trying to create heaven on earth, whereas previously the norm for society was self-sufficiency. You consume what you can, and you have the number of goods that you need. No more. More than what you need is not either valuable or not desirable. And even now, Islam preaches simplicity. You should have according to your needs, not more and not less. But with the disappearance of heaven and faith in God, then the effort was made to multiply the riches on earth to get heaven on earth. And so the idea that our problems won't be solved by God, but they can be solved by having as much money. And so this is now the common belief of all humanity, that all our problems can be solved by money. Everyone in this generation believes it, even though it's not true. But this is the faith of this. So what were the causes of the Industrial Revolution? Well, there was no one cause. This is one thing that has been discovered. I mean, people put forth monocausal theories that it was caused by such X, Y, and Z. No. Ultimately, after a long debate, it has been decided that there is no one cause. It's a multiplicity of causes all working together that led to the Industrial Revolution, which is why it didn't happen in different places. Because this question is often asked that, okay, why England had industry, why not in India, and so on. So it's this question is asked to prove the superiority of the whites, but this is not, these are just historical accidents. So first step was the surplus in agriculture, which led to the creation of labor markets and closures, and there were inventions which led to large-scale production possibilities, energy sources, coal and manufacture iron, etc. So the only point of importance here is that it was not a natural event which had only one cause, and that, like the hunter-gatherer shifting to the agriculture, this is more or less natural, and only one event is required, discovery of agriculture. But the shift from a feudal society to industrial society requires a multiplicity of causes. So what were the characteristics of the industry? What happened as a result of the Industrial Revolution? Well, there were factory towns, slums, which provided the what Marx has called the excess supply of labor, the something else is his name. Long working hours, children, all labor is exploited. This is described in Dickens' novels. Very low wages, because capitalists have power and they can make profits. So basically you give subsistence wages, enough to live on. And population increased because of the agricultural revolution. So now that's the surface, the events of history. Now we look beneath the surface to look at what were the hidden drivers of this change. Now what Polanyi says, and he says that this is surprising, is that there's only one central driver, and he says that this is amazing hypothesis that I'm putting forth, and people will be incredulous. He says I think that the central thing is the invention of big machines which have large. This is the key, and from this all other developments follow. So invention of large means within a commercial economy. So he says that once elaborate machines and plant were used for production in a commercial society, the idea of the self-regulating market, which is the basic economy which we have today, the market which does where there is no regulation, this had to happen, he says. Although it's not he says this had to happen in not in a causal sense, but in a sort of a historical evolution sense. So first, there was a commercial society. Commercial society emerged, and we will trace how that happened in greater detail, because Polanyi does so. But basically, commercial society, the driver of that is that there was previously there was self-sufficiency, but now we have two sectors. There's the agriculture sector and the commerce sector. So there has to be trade. Agriculture sector had to sell things to the towns. The towns have to provide some products to the cities. So that's the start of your commercial society, where in the traditional society, all exchange takes place within social relationships. You give a gift to somebody, you get back a gift. So this commercial anonymous transaction, that I sell something for money, I buy money from somebody else that I don't know, this is a characteristic of the market economy. So when you have large machines, in this society, in a commercial society, then you will start producing large quantities of goods. And who will do it? Obviously not the agriculturists, it will be the merchants. There are two types of but when they use machines, then they will have to buy inputs for the machine. And now, because you have large machines, it cannot be done by social relationships. This is the key point, that a social relationship work on small scale, but if you have to buy 1,000 tons, then you will have to go to anonymous people. And similarly, if you buy 1,000 laborers, then you can't know everybody and can't be within your family or your tribe. So again, impersonal market mechanisms will have to come into existence. So this is a deep insight of Polanyi, which has not been, any other people have not. So since large machines are expensive, you have to produce large amounts of goods, and so your production lines must be secure. You must have a market where you can sell. And he says that's not so important as the fact that your input market must be secure. You must be able to buy labor, and you must be able to buy raw materials in the market freely. It shouldn't be that somebody is sitting in command over you and you have a social relationship, and if he has it, then he will give it. If he doesn't, that will cause, because in a traditional society, that's no problem. You produce one season and you don't produce something the next season. But here, you have a large machine. It was very expensive. Now you have to keep it running in order to pay it back. So you have to have these impersonal mechanisms, and the markets have to be functioning. You have to be able to buy labor, and you have to be able to buy raw material. He says this causes deep problems with natural social relationships when you can buy and sell labor, because that means you can buy and sell human beings, and this is disturbing to traditional society. So the great transformation is the replacement of a traditional society by a market economy, and the functioning of a market economy requires a change in the motive of action for the parts of the members. In a traditional society, all our action is based on social interaction. I do something because I like to do it, and because it increases my prestige and standing, because people will praise me. It is very rare and very unusual that you do something to make money for it. It's not common. But in a market society, you are buying and selling things, and you need people to be motivated by money in order that you can rely on them to be your labor force. In fact, when the Aramco first went into Saudi and they started producing oil, they would hire these Bedouins for the labor force, and they would work 1 or 2 days and then say, goodbye, I've had enough. So they had a big problem as to how to keep these people. So they built them very luxury flats with lots of comforts and luxury. So when the boss would say something, abuse the employee, he would say, okay, I'm going. But the wife would say, no, we are quite comfortable here. You have to put up with these things. Just behave nicely. So the gain motive, once it comes into existence, then it changes the nature of the society. So all transactions are turned into money transactions, and when you have money transactions, then money comes into existence also, and that has its own properties and roles, which we will discuss later. So he says that the peculiarity of this market system is that it has to be allowed to run on its own. The other option, which was tried in communist Russia, is that the state dictates, okay, you produce this. But basically, there are many problems with regulating the economy. Basically, as long as you have markets, so people are producing in order to make money. People are being hired to make money. Now, if you interfere with this, if you say, okay, I will give the laborers subsistence wage, like today there is a lot of movement about providing universal income. So then they have, if industry provides an uncomfortable and adverse environment, then once they have a living wage, they will not do it. So, if you guarantee profits to the merchant, then he will not produce quality goods. So, basically, the market requires a certain amount of freedom to function. And that's why we are talking about free markets, which he calls self-regulating is the term that is used by Polanyi, that it has to be allowed to function on its own. So many ways that you can interfere with the market to try to improve things, but generally speaking, these improvements can cause actually difficulties, and that's what all your economic theory is about, that don't interfere with the free market, otherwise you get worse results. So the Great Transformation took a paternalistic and regulatory economy. So paternalistic means that we look out for each other, we take care of our poor, and those who have power are not supposed to abuse the ones without power. And there are regulations of all sorts governing use of property. So even the concept of private property is not in the traditional society, it's not like that of the market economy. People have private property, but other people have right of passage, many different kinds of, you can't claim that this is mine and you get off my land, and it's a trust. It's given to you for reasonable use. So Polanyi says that this transition from the paternalistic regulatory to the market economy is like the transition of a caterpillar to a butterfly, that it's a complete revolution. It's not a continuous growth, it's not an evolutionary process. So he says that when you sell things as industrials, that's not such a big problem. This doesn't affect the fabric of society, but the inputs that you buy, the land and the labor, this creates a social transformation, because previously land is your habitat. It has a sacred relationship. It produces for you. It's like the concept of Mother Earth. But when it becomes a commodity for sale, then basically, you can trace the process that today's environmental catastrophe is because there's no respect for the land. It's just something to exploit, to make money with. So you cut down a forest and you don't have any appreciation for the millions of years that it took to grow. And you say, okay, I have profits from lumber. So this is So he says that the man's natural relationships with each other, society is damaged, because human beings now become units in parts of machines, so they have. And also man's relationship with his habitat, the land is damaged, because now the laborers are not actually producing for themselves. They are producing surplus for the sake of the landlord, who will market it. So their relationship with land is no longer that the land feeds us. It's actually the landlord feeds us. We just do the work. So all of the natural relationships of traditional societies are destroyed by this transition. Now, one thing in which he has been often misunderstood, that he's not talking about, he says that market society came into existence. He says markets have been in existence since the Stone Ages, but it is an incidental feature of economic life. It's a peripheral. If you cut it out, nothing serious will happen. But in a market society, the market economy is at the heart of the production and distribution process. If you cut out the market, people will die of starvation, because that's the main mechanism by which things are produced and distributed. So economies are essential. Every society has an economy, but markets don't exist in traditional societies. So he says that Adam Smith started this myth that market societies have been in existence forever, and that this is very harmful. and he says that men are by nature economics. So the Homo economics myth starts from there, that this is the nature of man, that he haggles and he barters and he trades. This, he says, is simply not true. But he said that no misreading of the past, so Adam Smith has proved more prophetic of the future. What he said about the past was completely wrong, but as a prediction about the future, it was very true that later on people did become Homo economicus because they were shaped by the market society. So he says that, well, since market economy did not emerge naturally, did not evolve as a process of gradual evolution, so we now hunt in historical sources, because especially, you see, the Adam Smith myth says that it all starts naturally, and so markets have been there from time immemorial. It's not true. Traditional societies were not market economies, so now we look for the break point. Where did it happen? How did markets get started? So he says that now the thing is that when people started looking at the anthropology, they found that these Adam Smith stories, which became widely accepted, were not true. That the ancient societies did not have markets and did not have Homo economics. So then there was a switch in the economists who had started up by this time. In 1775 was Adam Smith, and you have Ricardo and Marx and many other economists. So they were relying on Adam Smith, but when they found that the anthropological research doesn't bear them out, then they said that, okay, well, that's all in the past, it doesn't matter. So what's in the past, what the society, that now modern societies are like this. So again, they ignored, and like your textbooks do, they just describe modern capitalistic societies without any connection that we have a traditional society, and it's actually in transition. We could say that the great transformation is taking place in our society right now. So the other possibilities, so there is no alternative. This is Tina of Margaret Thatcher, that market economy is the only way. There is no other way to run a society. So what he says is that no, market economies are deadly dangerous to humans, and so we must look in the past to find other models for how we can live. And especially he's writing post-World War II that we have to look urgently for these models and use these alternatives to the market society, because the market society doesn't work. It leads to wars and misery regularly. So this is just elaborating what I've already said, that he says, okay, so what happens when we look at real societies, traditional societies, as opposed to Adam Smith's myth? So we find that there is a universal invariant of human behavior, and that is that people are part of society and they try to maximize their social standing, simply because we all need each other to survive. No one can survive on his own. Everybody. So your social standing is your means to survival. So he says that everything, and all the economic activities, production takes place and distribution takes place, but these are not driven by the profit motive. They are driven by different types of social goals, which different types of societies organize in different ways. So the motives are different in hunting and fishing communities, and in large despotic societies they are different. But the economic system doesn't work by the profit, by the motive of gain, which is the central motive in a market society. He says that our survival depends on society. We follow social norms regardless of characters. He says that in a society where generosity is valued, people might be personally very selfish and stingy and miserly, but they will act in a generous way because the society forces them to do so. So um, the social norms are chosen by us as a society. And this was the revolution that was brought by Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He changed the social norms. And today, the battle that is going on in our society is between a decayed and sort of really rotten version of Islamic norms, which is thought to be Islam, and the market norms. So the market norms are much stronger than rotten and decayed Islamic norms. But the original Islamic norms are much stronger. So now the secular-minded people see the decay and rot in Islam, and they reject Islam on this basis. And they are attracted by the secular society as an alternative. And they are right in that sense that what they see of Islam has nothing to do with the Islam that was brought by the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So the task before us is the same as the task which faced the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, was to create a model which is a shining example, because it no longer exists. So we are living in Jahiliyyah, just like the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he says that in the traditional societies, there are two main principles of exchange. One of them is reciprocity, and the other is redistribution. So reciprocity is, if I do you a favor, you will do me a favor. And so this is one of the ways in which exchange takes place. And the redistribution means that someone who has more is supposed to give to those who have less. So this is generosity. So reciprocity is a very strong principle of all religions. And I have just collected some quotations about this from different religions. So this is the traditional basis of a non-market society. And as recent work on behavioral economics has shown, this is a very strong motivation today in market societies as well, although economic theory does not take this into account, which is why it is mistaken when it comes to, that's why economics are very surprised when they see the ultimatum game and many other results in real world, because people act on reciprocity and on different motivations which are not mentioned in the economics textbooks, because that's not what drives the Homo economicus. And redistribution is basically about generosity. So the Quran is full of exhortations that those who have should give to those who don't have. And this is a mechanism is enforced by different means in different societies. So other than that, there is the third principle. These are the three principles which govern traditional societies. One of them is to produce your own needs, that's self-sufficiency, and the other is exchange and reciprocity. So he says this production is a rather advanced principle. I mean, not all societies have it, because if you have enough abundance in the nature around you, then you don't need to produce things for yourself. Like the Red Indian society was hunter-gatherer, and they had enough food in abundance, so they didn't need to produce anything. So now there is a conflict between self-sufficiency and market norms, which Polanyi says that even Aristotle recognized that, okay, if you produce a little bit and sell it to others, this is not going to interfere with your self-sufficiency. But if you start doing this on a large scale, this is going to interfere with the householding. That is the word used for economy. The Greek word for economy is householding, production for oneself. So he says that if you start producing on large cases, this is going to cause interference with the householding motive of production for self. So the market economy was a mutation on traditional society. He says that all economic systems up to end of feudalism were based on these three principles of exchange: reciprocity, redistribution, and householding, self-production. And then there were institutions which were there, and he has an analysis which I will bypass. And these societies were successful economically in producing goods and distributing goods to everybody, but the methodology had nothing to do with the market. That's the key thing. I mean, people did not produce things to sell them, and people did not distribute things because other people paid money for them. Now, so from 16th century onwards, as you start getting surplus, so you get producing surplus, agricultural revolution, you start getting markets, people sell their goods elsewhere. You also are getting trade. But he says that this is not a problem in the sense that these markets do not interfere with the traditional economy. You can have markets as long as they are subordinate to society and they play a peripheral role. The problem arises when markets take over societies. So how did the transformation takes place? How did it happen that society became subordinate to markets? So he says that this event which took place was of overwhelming importance because instead of social relations deriving the economy, you have the market deriving social relations. And so we see the effects that all relationships, even the parent-child relationship, is now a market relationship. In the US, the children are suing their parents for not bringing them up properly, and there are articles you can find in economics journals about the cost and benefits of bringing up children. How much do you invest in them and what benefit they bring. So this is all market economy. So this means that the society is now a part of the market rather than market being part of society. And he says that a market economy can only function within a market society. So basically making market central drives the society to become a market society. So this is just reiterating that in ancient societies, the research shows that the markets may exist or may not exist. It has no significant effect on society. And similarly, money can exist and cannot exist, but it doesn't play a central role. So these things were present, but they were not central. So now he starts to investigate how did markets come into existence. So he said that if you look at history, you have local economies. These are self-sufficient. There is no trading within a city and neighboring villages. Trade is basically occurs with strangers, and external trade is you go far away. It's like an adventure, exploration. It's like hunting. It's war, piracy. So actually, Findlay and Uruk, this is the book which has been written which is the history of international trade, and this is what I would like to teach a trade course from, rather than these silly comparative advantage models which don't actually work in practice. So there are three types of trade. There's international trade, which is you bring in spices from India to England, they don't exist. And so you take goods from one place where they don't exist to another where they are needed. So he says local trade is within a community. So there is no such trade in the early society, but international trade did take place from long time ago. And then internal trade, which is from one city to another city. That is a different type because you have same types of goods. Wheat is growing here and wheat is growing there. So that did take place, but and this is sort of competitive trade. The international trade is not a competitive trade in the sense that you're bringing something which nobody has ever seen, so there's no market, at least in early stages. But the internal trade, which is from city to city, this is sort of competitive, because if you're short of wheat, then you try to buy from nearby towns. So these are the three types of trades. And so he searches for the origins of markets, and you find a lot of things. There were port towns where goods would come in. There were specially designated towns called staples where trade could take place. There were fairs which used to take place in England where people would go and buy. Actually, we also have report of fairs in the Mecca. So these were not market events. These were actually carnivals, celebrations, and they came and they went, and people would bring strange things, and there would be trades. But these were peripheral activities, and that they did not develop into markets. So local markets developed first of all in towns, because that's the first place where you need to buy things from your countryside and sell. Although normally this was not done on a market basis, it was clear, and he cites many examples, that people understood that these markets are harmful to society. So there were many rules and regulations and purification required, and many things, rituals associated with markets to make sure that the markets don't contaminate society. So these local markets, there were also these local markets where people would get together. It's like garage sales where you take your excess and you put it out, and other people come and buy. These have been existing, but they are not significant. They did not grow into the markets that we see today. So the basic conclusion is that the markets were created by the nation state, which forced, against the resistance of local towns, trade between its cities, because that was the way to maximize national production. And this was the start of mercantilism, which said that, okay, we are looking for gold. How can we maximize gold? So then they forced them open, even though the local trade was burgesses were the town notables which were in control of cities, and they were very strongly resistant to any breakdown in the self-sufficiency. That was their main goal. And trade obviously is a threat to self-sufficiency. They controlled it and resisted it, but the nation state was powerful enough to force its will upon a collection of city-states. So when industry got going, the export goods started being produced, and exports was both within the country to other cities, because basically industrial production was specialized by cities. So you had your internal export-import business and long distance. Initially it was cloth, wool. So when this started taking place, still there was a lot of resistance, but that's where the markets originate. He says that the intercity trade. But even then, the city authorities tried to make sure that this doesn't contaminate the countryside, and within their town they tried to maintain self-sufficiency and keep the markets isolated and keep them limited in function. But the nation state forced the nationalization, and so there were fiercely protectionist towns, but the emergence of this mercantilism, basically, the intercity trade had gotten going, because production process is increasing, surplus is increasing, trade is increasing. So they broke down the barriers which existed between the self-sufficient economies and the intercity trade. So that was. So what were the drivers of this emergence of the mercantilism? Well, one of them was the commercial revolution, which we have seen. With the Crusades, there were some new goods discovered. Basically, in a traditional society is pretty boring in terms of consumption. There's not much variety. You just eat. And in fact, society is not oriented around consumption. Consumption is something you do because you need to, and life is about other things. But in market society, life is all about consumption. So when when new goods and different types of goods came into existence, then this gave an impetus. And the other thing was the existence of sovereign power, the uniting of nation states, city states into nation states. That created the power that was necessary to break down the barriers to self-sufficiency at the city level. And there was uniform administration that was being given, so rules could be enforced across the country. When this development started taking place, markets were highly regulated and everybody was very afraid of monopolies, because basically you are at the mercy. I mean, if you start saying, okay, I'm an industrial town, I sell my products, I buy wheat, and if people acquire monopoly on wheat, then they can charge you whatever they want. So there was a lot of regulation to prevent monopolies at that time, because it was a direct survival threat. Okay, so I think that's the last. So basically, at this point, we have come up to the middle of the 18th century, and now the next lecture we will discuss about the self-regulating market. So the self-regulating market has not come into existence, but the preconditions for the self-regulating market are here. Now, how did the market actually take over the society? So this is the gin that came out of the bottle, and now we're trying to put it back in the bottle. This is the problem, because this gin is threatening to destroy the planet that we live in. How come this is only 1 hour? What? Oh, it's a 1 hour lecture. Oh, I thought we had done 2 to 3. Achha, theek hai. I thought it was okay. That's fine. I thought that I had already taken an hour and a half.